to talk to you today about is mission relevance. So DoD has a mission, right, which is, and I want to be very clear when I say this, we're here to deter a war in space. We really don't want a war to break out in space for a variety of reasons. One is the U.S. is heavily dependent on the U.S. and the world is heavily dependent on space. That's GPS, the time on GPS is used for all the banking industry. It's used for farming. It's used for a lot of different stuff, stuff as well. Believe it or not, if you were watching the World Cup, Microsoft found that their fiber all went down for some of the games, and they had to pipe all that stuff through commercial satellites to make sure that the games were good. So you're more connected to space than you ever realized. But the DoD's job on deterring war in space also comes with a bunch of other missions. So I'm going to kind of talk about that mission relevance. And again, if you have questions, please ask me or ask those of you. So next slide. And I think this is a bit old. Is, early on in 1969, right, there was Sputnik that was the first time. It slowly grew. There were only a couple of orbits that we kind of used. There's only like 1,500 objects in space.
It was either our stuff or it was their stuff. Well, now, and I'm sure most of you know this, it is extremely complicated. You have multiple countries talking about going to the moon. You have groups like SpaceX, Amazon, and OneWeb with an enormous number of satellites. I can tell you I've been to the floor at both SpaceX and Amazon, which are strangely like 3 miles away from each other up in Seattle. And their floors are building satellites at incredible speeds using just automotive parts systems. You have things like the Mission Life Extension Vehicle. So Northrop Grumman figured out that they could build a vehicle that attached to communication satellites. And the big lifetime issue now on those is fuel and keeping the inclination of those such that they stay in the geoplane. Well, they now have a vehicle that comes up, attaches, provides GNC and propulsion capability. We're seeing some satellite collisions and breakups and ASAT tests, right? The Chinese did an ASAT test on a weather satellite, created a bunch of junk. Not to be outdone, the US did their own ASAT test. The DoD showed they could do it. But the other interesting thing is the lunar piece of it. There is another lunar race kind of going on for who will have the first rights of actually permanent lunar capabilities. But there's an enormous commercial marketplace that's developing there as well. So space has gotten very, very, very complicated, but it's also very much integrated into our lives, especially with SpaceX and Amazon and OneWeb and some of the things they're doing. The best example I can give you of how integrated this is into your life, even if you go to the grocery store, is Bloomberg Financials. Right now, Mission to Planet Earth that was done by NASA in the 2000s or 90s, I can't remember the time frame. They were taking pictures of avocado groves, and depending on the color of green that was coming out of those pictures, they could tell exactly if the avocados were ripe for the picking. And then suppose you take imagery of all those avocado fields, you now can pretty much figure out what the price of avocados is. So this gives you some idea as to the level of complexity, and Bloomberg and his Bloomberg Financials tools is now dominating that whole area. And it's all based on commercial remote sensing. Launches in review, I like this slide because it kind of talked about where we're going from a launch standpoint. Certainly with SpaceX and their Falcon rockets, and then smaller groups like Rocket Labs. It used to be that the big part of space was it was very expensive. It was like, thousands of dollars per pound to put something in orbit. With Falcon and the Renaissance and launch vehicles going on, that's no longer the case. And there's massive number of launches going on, and everyone has figured out how to build cheaper launch vehicles. The best example I can also give you, United Launch Alliance, that does most of the national security launches, which is a combined Boeing Lockheed organization. The cost for the Atlas has not grown at all in the last 15 years. Just, straight cost. It's like $120 million for an Atlas V. And that's what it was back in 2000. Launch costs have really come down and made it so that that number just is skyrocketing every year. Small sat trends. One of the things that, because space is now a warfighting domain, the DoD has realized that putting all of our functions under one spacecraft doesn't make sense anymore. So for example, if you look at wideband gap filler SATCOM or wideband global SATCOM at WGS, they have like 4 or 5 different transponders that they use, and they stuffed as many different communication satellite capabilities on one satellite. What that also means is those are also big juicy targets that if you wanted to launch a direct ascent ASAT, you take out an enormous amount of capability very quickly. So the DoD has figured out this does not make sense anymore, and that what we need is kind of a hybrid architecture. Hybrid being, I put things at different orbits, I make small vehicles and some large vehicles, and that is driving the small sat capabilities, at least on the DoD side. The other thing that I can tell you, and Jesse, and I said it earlier today, is the University Nanosat program. When we first started the program, the ranking in the Space Experiment Review Board, because these were seen as just STEM programs, they were at the bottom of the list as far as overall priority. They still got launched. It was still okay. But now what we're seeing is because of the increase in technologies, et cetera, the UNP programs are becoming more and more relevant because one, you guys have been pretty darn innovative, but the other part about it is the technology is caught up. And now you can do more in a smaller package system. And it really has enabled some very unique and interesting missions. So that's a little bit of what's going on with small sats. I'll skip over this, but it's available in the package. Is the small sat launches have gone up. All the trends that you're looking at are just through the roof. The other thing is the UNP program has been a huge part of driving that trend. The program, if you haven't heard, has graduated like 5,000 students out of it. There's a whole bunch of companies that have started up and are now producing small satellites. Space Development Agency is going to buy 1,000 satellites of their own as well, which is a DoD organization, and they've contracted with a bunch of these small sat vendors. So small satellites have grown in capability, and both the DoD and commercial has figured this out. The other one I can tell you is, so take, for example, commercial remote sensing. When commercial remote sensing started in the 2000s, they had 1 meter resolution on the ground, and it was primarily 2 companies, Digital Globe and GeoEye. And these were big vehicles. What's happened is groups like Black Sky have come in and figured out that there's a marketplace for more persistent coverage with smaller vehicles. And Black Sky just went public. In fact, the chief technology officer lives here in Albuquerque, and he helped set up the UNP program, Peter Wagner. That's the other trend that's coming in. And Black Sky is getting to the point that they're more commercially viable in some ways than Digital Globe, which is the only large satellite commercial remote sensing group. It's had a global impact as well. There are more countries doing this as well. We are starting to partner more with what we call the Five Eyes. So I'm going to use a DoD term. Five Eyes are basically all the English-speaking countries: Canada, US, UK, Australia, and New Zealand, and US. That's what we call the Five Eyes. We partner a lot with them. We've also done what's called the military satellite utility study with most of our NATO partners and found that there is lots of utility in these systems. It was a multi-country agreement where we asked the question, is there really utility? And the answer was yes right away. And what we actually found were there were more missions we could do with small sats than we had realized. So that's the other trend. And the industry is growing. So the missions are varied. I talked about OneWeb, and to the left, which is the light blue. OneWeb is a commercial remote sensing company, but Starlink in their satellite constellation system is still considered a small sat. And they have certainly set up a production line where for the first time ever, we're not doing one-off small satellites. We're actually producing these like thousands of them. If you've ever go Google it, I don't know how many of you seen the stack of Starlink satellites that they did on the first launch. Have you guys gone and look at this? It's pretty impressive. It's a stack of like 20 satellites that they just pancaked together, and then they just flew off one at a time. So that's a large part of the brown part. And then there's other commercial small satellite systems. Those are wide and varied. You'll notice that governments is small and military is small, but I can tell you military is going to grow once a Space Development Agency finishes what they're called their tranche of LEO satellites. So the DoD has gotten involved in this and actually set up a whole new organization called Space Development Agency. So I'm not going to speak to them because I'd rather have them. If you go Google them, you can kind of see what they're doing. So the DoD wedge is going to grow here pretty quick, but a lot of it is commercial. But the DoD is certainly starting to leverage a lot of that. I talked a lot about this already as far as how it impacts our life. For those of you who don't know, the farming one is an interesting one, and I'll kind of step you through that. So a while back, it was discovered that the farms were using way too much water to water their plants, and they were getting a lot of fertilizer runoff that was running off into the rivers, etc. So John Deere and a couple other people figured out that if they had a tractor that had really good GPS accuracy, so they take the GPS signal and then they add a complementary GPS systems on top of it. Literally, they'll plant the seed in a particular place and then come back and water and fertilize just there in a particular area. And that is cut down on the fertilizer costs and the watering costs. The food you eat now is enabled by GPS. The global economy for space is rapidly approaching $1 trillion and growing at a rate of almost $200 billion a year. It is pretty darn amazing how fast it has grown. Some of the things that our adversaries has recognized that we use space quite a bit. So the first Gulf War, if you go back and look, it was all enabled, a lot of it, the precision bombing capability. So this is the best statistic I like. In the 1940s, we would send a fleet of 100 B-17 bombers to hit a target. And their accuracy was a half a mile. So you'd have to send in 100 B-17 bombers. That got better in Vietnam, but by the time you get to the first Gulf War, you literally have one plane, like an F-117, that would bomb 2 targets. That's all GPS enabled. And that means that we're putting the bomb on a target that we care about and not the school next door. So that's the other piece of it that has really helped us. We are serious, that last box, taking serious looks at what anti-satellite or what I would call counter space. That's the term that's primarily used. So if you read space control or counter space are the 2 terms used to describe war and space. It is pretty well known out there that in any kind of wartime situation, that adversaries will try and degrade or take out our space capabilities. I can't give you details, but I can tell you it's already happening in the war in Ukraine. And it's very serious. All I can tell you is there's an FBI investigation going on because of things that have gone on in Ukraine. I'm not even briefed to it, but it is very serious. And that is the first thing that our adversaries will try and do, is take out our space capabilities. That has also changed how the DoD is going to be doing things in space. So we're not going to build one big satellite with all of our capabilities. We're going to spread them across different orbits, different numbers of satellites, etc. So that's radically changing what we call the resiliency. In fact, there's a great definition of resiliency out there for space. So that is a lot of, so the US Space Force, we're dedicated to accessing, protecting, and defending space. And that doesn't just mean DoD assets, it means commercial systems too. We all go back to, we really want to deter war in space. A war in space would be bad for everybody, including, the Chinese, who I'll just bring them up, right? They have built a PNT constellation called the Vidao that is just as good as the GPS system. Air Force Research Lab, we are, with the stand-up of the Space Force sits under Department of the Air Force. So they're very similar to Navy, which has the Navy and the Marines. The Air Force has the Air Force and the Space Force. In general, space is primarily done at Kirtland Air Force Base here with Space Vehicles Directorate. Maui Research Site actually has space situational awareness telescopes. Yes, we have a site at Maui. Sounds fun until you go out there and you realize you're working while everyone is having a vacation. And we also do other parts like Information Directorate looks at space cyber systems. The Air Force Office of Scientific Research that does the basic research is the one that pays for the UNP program. So that's the other linkage there as well. So what do we here at Space Vehicles invest in? So we have these 4 investment areas. The main thing that space has always been used for is comm and PNT. The common thing that I've heard is, comms, no bombs within the DoD. Believe it or not, the way we prosecute wars is someone has to come over and go, oh yeah, the intelligence community says that's a target. Airplane flies in and then says, is this the right target that you think is the target before we drop the bomb? So comm is very important, and we're looking at, but it's also threatened. There are jammers out there that can jam comm systems. And so we're looking at new and varied comm capabilities. We also have a quantum group, which I managed for a little while, that's looking at sensing and timing. They're a very great group. The other major thing that we do in space is missile warning and tactical ISR. So missile warning, right? The Cold War era, we had satellites up there, the DSP satellites that were there specifically to detect missiles coming from Russia. They were an integral part of an overall network. In fact, space primarily, the big push in DoD originally was for the nuclear enterprise and to set all the systems up for the sensing and comms to allow us to, do mutual assured destruction. And that group continues on because targets are getting dimmer and missiles are getting better. The other thing we invest heavily in is space environment. Got to understand the space environment, which is awfully nasty. The sun right now is creating coronal holes that are massive and just belching a bunch of particles at the Earth. It's been very quiet the last few solar cycles. Solar cycles happen about every 7 years. The last like 3 or 4 have been pretty mild. This one is particularly been nasty. The coronal holes are huge. So go Google that. You can see what they look like. They're actually pretty impressive. So we have a whole group that tries to understand what's going on there. We also do pervasive technologies. So all the bus level things, solar arrays, GNC, those kind of efforts. Space control, I did talk about that. The big thing that we invest in, not weapons in space, but we are looking at cislunar domain awareness, autonomous systems falls under this, and cyber. The multi-agent autonomous part, autonomy, spacecraft are autonomous in most cases, but how you do this with multiple satellites working together is where we're trying to work towards. So as you disaggregate your architecture from everything being on one thing to lots of different things, you now have to worry about the network architecture, how you link all those things together, and they have to work together. So autonomy becomes a big part of it too. And Michelle Simon's group is very good working those, and we have some flight experiments there. Smallsat has done a number of different things. XVI is looking at there's a particular comm band called Link 16 that's used by just about every aircraft. It's a fairly old standard, but it's fairly well used to communicate between different aircraft. We're going to try and bring it so you can bring Link 16 node from space. Nuclear deterrence operations, one of the big things that we do there is NDO refers to basically everything that the Air Force does in the nuke side, building better PNT systems. All of the ICBMs that the U.S. Air Force has in their inventory does not use GPS. They were the original lights out GPS or GPS denied group. So we're building next generation inertial sensors. And then we have a group that does nuclear explosion monitoring. So not everybody is adhering to the nuclear explosion ban. And so we have a group that specifically is trying to figure that out. And then all space operations right now for the U.S. Space Force is done, well, most of it, at a Schriever Space Force base up in Colorado. So they have a bunch of software tools to help them understand what's going on. And we have a group specifically up there. They're very much run like a kind of almost a software startup company. It's actually, their space looks very much like this. It's kind of funny. Go up there and it's very different than the rest of the lab, but they're a software group and they just do software. And they're an awesome group. They've created something called super coders, where they're teaching enlisted folks how to fix their own code. It's actually kind of an interesting program. So those are the 8 areas that Space Vehicles Directorate. We also, as I said, have Maui and Starfire Optical Range that do ground-based space situational awareness. We have a materials group up at RIPAT that works materials, and then AFOSR that works generic technologies. This is a distro A document that you can go out and read. So when the Space Force stood up, General Raymond, who is the Chief of Space Operations, he was the 4-star general, created this document. It was very interesting how he binned things. It's an interesting read if you want to understand how we're thinking about space. At the bottom is we want to know what's going on in space. The second is information and mobility. As we begin to pull this architecture apart, it's great if we have all these sensors. It's not very helpful unless you can get all the information together, fused, and create an operating picture. So he pulled that out as a separate area. And then mobility and logistics covers rockets, but also the fact that right now we want to get to a point where we can maneuver our space vehicles without regret. Combat power projection is an interesting read, and space superiority is interesting. But space power doctrine, space power book is out there. You can download it. It's an interesting read of what the Space Force is thinking about and where we're thinking of going. This is an old list, but from the previous director, but it's still pretty relevant. One of the things that we discovered with, if you have jammers operating, if you have this disaggregated architecture, you got to have multiple comm paths to get the data where you want it to go. Right. We do this in the terrestrial domain all the time. If a server goes down, something goes down, we just route the data a different way. Gee, go figure. So we're trying to bring that to the space environment and then managing that hybrid architecture. We're also, one of the things that we figured out is if space is a warfighting domain, if I can make it economically difficult for you to attack my vehicles, and basically if I have low cost protection systems, if I can get to that economic advantage where your missile to hit me is $1 million and I can counter it with something that's $100,000, that's the place you want to be. You don't want to be in the reverse where it costs $10 million to take out $1 million missile. That doesn't work very, and they can just build more missiles. AI and machine learning is another big area. I mean, people have talked about that. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can read the list. We're also looking at clean sheet architectures. This is a pretty good list of where we're trying to go. And then we'll say a little bit about digital engineering. And I'll give you the background for this. When Boeing built the 777, it got to a point where their model was, we're going to farm everything out to these small companies, and then we're going to system engineer and integrate the thing together. Well, that created, the costs went like this. There were issues with part supplies and getting all the parts to show up at the same time. And what Boeing then tried on the 787, which was a resounding success, is they used a digital engineering environment to do the design. It meant that ICDs and interfaces were better defined. And so those problems between different companies suddenly went away. And the other thing that they did is they did what's called vertically integrated the production. And so they brought more back in-house. And this is what SpaceX and Amazon are doing, that they'll build something on their own if they can. And that helps as well. This whole digital engineering environment is a design tool methodology to basically manage interfaces. And Boeing learned this the hard way on the 777 and 787. So I'll go through a couple of our programs. NTS3, I was the first program manager on this, and then the director had said, no, we need to go over and do something else. I was kind of sad. I wanted to run this thing. This is next generation GPS. NTS 1 and 2 were done in the 70s, so we haven't done a GPS technology satellite in a long time. There's a lot of different things we're doing on this. We shoved everything but the kitchen sink, and the kitchen sink into this. We have different signals we're doing, flexible timekeeping, a whole bunch of things. This is like a $200 million satellite that's set to launch about a year. So it's almost fully built. And now we're in the test phase of this. It's fairly big. And I'll introduce a term to you. The little ring in the middle is the bus where all the components sits and everything else. And then the panels out are really the payloads. These are called ESPA rings. We did the first one with Eagle, but the ESPA ring is basically about 1.5 meters. That center ring is 1.5 meters in diameter. So you can see this is not a small vehicle. Spider, one of the things that we found during the war on terror is, oh my gosh, logistics is expensive. To get a gallon of gas into Afghanistan with hundreds of dollars per gallon, that's really expensive. And it took a long time to set up that logistics train through Pakistan. And the idea was, yeah, we don't want to do that again. So can you do power beaming from space? there's a couple of different technologies that have caught up and made this. This is not a new idea. This is a pretty old idea, actually. I think it was 1970s that this idea was first talked about. What's happened is the panels have gotten better, and the panels now you can take sunlight on the front side and expand energy on the, solar on the back side and expand energy on the front side. All of that stuff has gotten to the point that it's manufacturable, so I can do it cheaply. And then I just have to, the big problem on this is actually the thermal and deployable structure. The economics have caught up to make this viable again. Oracle, one of the things as we're gonna go out to those, as the cislunar race is starting up, the DoD, the Space Force has a requirement to basically, so think of this like in naval terms, keep the lines of communication open out to the cislunar domain. So that's doing space situational awareness, understanding what things are traversing back and forth to this lunar domain. Oracle is the first vehicle to try and figure out like what are the requirements to do this. So this is an experimental vehicle. We just awarded the contract a year and a half ago to understand how to do this. The hard part is if I want to know where like you are, I have to know where I am, and doing PNT and comm out in cislunar space is pretty hard. NASA did it for years, but what if I then have to maneuver and redo my PNT? That's hard. Hybrid architecture demo, I talked about this a little bit. One of the questions that we asked from a commercial remote sensing standpoint was, if I took the conglomerate of all the commercial remote sensing assets, so Predistar, GOI, Digital Globe, all those groups, what could I do? And the answer came back pretty surprising, which was I could have almost 24/7 coverage over any spot on the earth. Well, not any spot, most spots. The interesting thing that started to come out was how fast could I get that data, and could I get it to a laptop? I mean, you would think like we should be able to do that. Actually, with the national systems, it's much harder to do that. But we started to ask the question, with a credit card and a laptop, what could I do? How dangerous could I be? The answer turned out we could be pretty darn dangerous and get lots of data. The interesting thing that also came out was it took literally hours for the companies to get us the data back to the laptop. And they have gotten better and better and better at that. They're down to like 60 minutes. That's an interesting piece, right? The timeliness of your data matters a lot in wartime. It's great if I find out that a tank is on the other side of the hill. It's bad if it's already fired its weapons at me, and then I find out that there's a tank on the other side. XVI, I kind of talked about this, which is Link 16 from space. You would think, yeah, duh, you should be able to do this. But Link 16 is a very special, what's called time division multi-access waveform, and it was not built to be compatible with space. So we've had to change some things on the space segment side to make this work. You all know about the UNP. I don't think I had to say this. In fact, the funny thing is, if you go back and look at the priorities list and this list, it actually, lines up pretty well. So we've been super impressed with UNP that you guys have been very innovative at coming up with ideas that have some great military relevance, which has scared a few people in a few circles, but I'm okay with that. We do have DoD objectives. They're at what's called distro D level. So it's called controlled unclassified information. I believe when the UNP program starts, we do share that with you and partner with people, and then compare cost and alternatives and create innovative and rapidly developing capabilities. Cost is very important to us. It used to be cost, performance at any cost. No, not anymore. That was Cold War, can't do that anymore. So it's made us, I love the famous Winston Churchill quote, we're out of money, now we have to think. Said it during World War II. And I think it's really true in government circles now. And that's it. I give you a broad brush of a lot of different stuff, and I pulled from a lot of different places, but hopefully I gave you a pretty good idea of what the heck is going on in space, but I can answer specific questions. So the question was, what are the current cyber security strategies on different missions? It's interesting. The National Academy of Engineering just came out with a study. There's something called zero trust architectures. They're still seen as fairly low. They're not as well developed, but it basically means I start all the way down at the processor level to ensure that I understand everything that's on that chip and I build up. And the other architecture thing that's being discussed is we used to just put everything on one chip and cram it all in there. There's some thinking now that that's not the right approach, that you actually have different functions on different smaller chips. And then I control or check to make sure, like, why is this function asking for information over here when it really doesn't need to? But I will tell you, cyber is one of those things that if you understand it today, you won't understand it tomorrow. It is a rapidly changing field. And so the question is, any advice of getting into that industry? I don't really. Here's why. My boyhood best friend, I've known this guy since he was 14. He has no college degree and he runs a $1 billion cybersecurity firm. He's just brilliant and he's just crazy and figures things out very quickly. The whole cyber area, I mean, there's those people. Then there's like people who graduate from Carnegie Mellon University who are like have deep academic cyber training, etc. It's the Wild West still out there in cyber. I want to thank you for letting me come and talk to you today. Hopefully I gave you a good smattering of what's going on in space. Try to throw in a little anecdotes here and there. As I said, you are participating in one of the premier programs. I don't think you realize it. You'll realize it later, but thank you for taking your summers to come out here, spend time with our program. Hopefully this is value added.
We'll make this more of a communication, a two-way communication. I myself am a little bit on the tired side of the house, and we do have people on the Zoom, right? Correct? How are we doing this morning? I just want to remind you guys, bring this back. So yesterday's presentation by Kate was awesome. I would propose to you to take some time during this whole month and go through every single page that she went through with you and kind of discuss it within your team, right? She had a whole bunch of great nuggets in that presentation. So make it justice and study it and absorb it, because doing so will help you be very successful. Peace? All right. There are two underlying themes that I want to get across, and I'll talk them as I'm going through. As a researcher, and basically one of my philosophies is, number one rule is follow the money. It is relevant. This is a relevant type of discussion. So follow the money. And number two is that knowledge is power. And you're getting some of that, right? All right. So those two underlying things. So we'll talk about areas of how to go for number one. By the way, how many of you actually helped your faculty write the proposal that got you here? Can I see a show of hands? 1, 2, 3.5, maybe 4, 5. Excellent. Okay. Really good. So, as you know, your faculty did a great job, right? Because out of 21 different university proposals, you were the top 8, right? That's it. You are here because you were the top 8. Plus your faculty thought very much of you by choosing you, right? So you got something that they think is very meaningful. So be proud of that you were selected to participate in this program, right? You got something. We're just going to have to figure out, what it is, but you got something. They already saw it in you. From a faculty perspective, they got a hard job. They got 3 things that they're required to do. And different universities put different weight in them, perhaps. And so what do you think the number one thing they have to do is? Question to the audience. Teach, that's one. Okay. What would be another thing they would need to do? Funding, right? So that was number one. So they have to somehow figure out how to obtain funding. And the funding allows them to do what? Research, right? So that's number one. funding to be able to do the research. Once they do the research, what's the number 2 thing that they have to do? Publish. Thank you. So they get graded on the type of publications that they get published, right? So in the academic circles, there's different tiers. You know, there's your top academic journals and there's, you know, your conference proceedings, right? So the higher the journal that they publish in, the higher the, you know, the prestige that that faculty brings into the institution. So funding to be able to do research, publish to be relevant, and the third thing, teach, right? So those 3 things. So as I mentioned, different universities kind of measure that 3-legged stool differently. Why am I telling you this? Why is it relevant? So what happens if your faculty, who did such a great job in getting you here, goes and gets another job sometime, right? They leave for a different position. Then what? Besides those 5 that helped the faculty put this proposal together, do you know where they proposed it to? Which website? Do you know how to get to that again? No, right? So having an understanding of where to look for funding is key, right? It's very relevant. And you may say, well, I'm a student, you know, I'm just planning to graduate and then after that I get a job and that's it. I don't have to do this. Well, perhaps we differ. Some of those areas in which I'll talk about has other opportunities that you could apply for in the future. For instance, where my 2 astrophysicists here, 1 and 2, oh, they're together, thanks. So we have fellowships for astrophysicists that you can apply to, but unless you know where they're at, right, have the knowledge of where they're at, you may not be able to do them because you don't know when to apply. If you guys are into airplanes and want to work in helping develop the new generation aircraft, do you know where to apply to get those scholarships, those fellowships? No? Well, I'll tell you. All right. So that's the gist. The relevance of understanding where to look for funding is key. With your faculty is good because you need a faculty to propose. That's a part of the university. But you as a student could also apply yourself. So we'll talk about the main 3 portals that NASA uses for putting out solicitations. Okay. Now, I'm just going to be talking about the NASA side of the house, right? Jesse, the Air Force, DOD has other different portals, right? And any 3-letter agency has their own. The National Science Foundation has their own. The Department of Energy, Department of, you name it, right? They have their own research portals that you could look into and apply for grants. So a faculty understands where all these funding opportunities are. And who knows, perhaps right now they're trying to write a proposal. So we'll talk about that too. So we'll talk about those 3, and then we'll dive into the Space Technology Mission Directorate one that just came out. It's currently live and it's part of the first one, Inspires. And then if we have time, we'll talk about something else. We know, you know, that we're going back to the moon, right? So there's a lot of funding currently being put out for going back to the moon. And that is just to learn how to live in other worlds, right? So we're going to go there first, try to have a base, and we're going to stay. All right, next one. Oh, forgot about the little video. You have music? It has a great tune. All the way up? Oh. That's all right. So you've been here, seen some of these facilities already. This is our, just a little intro. some of the engines. You have to have a couple of videos embedded in a presentation. If not, it's not. All right. So how do you get what gets you involved? So this is Inspires. So I just did a quick screenshot of the proposals that are due in the next 30 days. This is just 9 out of 22 items. So you will look into this and basically read more about it, hyperlink, and anyone can actually register into these systems. So you as students can actually register. It's free. And you could choose how many different things you would like to be notified of. If you want to be notified of fellowships, click that button. If you want to more about, small sats and so on. So there's a whole slew of things that you could apply for to get email. So be careful, because you get what you pay for. A lot of different opportunities. So your faculty pays attention to these things, right? They're trying to figure out which ones of these would best fit my research background. And so you could subscribe. There's a mailing list. There's also opportunities to serve as a review panelist, right? Perhaps maybe, not you right now, but in the future, you could become a reviewer. So that's huge. That's where most of our research opportunities are listed, and a lot of the fellowships are listed. Second portal that we have is called NASA Solve. So this is about challenges, prize competitions, things that you, students, can get engaged with. So when I go to universities, I mention this to a lot of the faculty, and as you know, faculty are very busy, right? So by you knowing that there's a site called NASA Solve that has these opportunities for students and faculty, you may go through them and tell your faculty, hey, what about this one? You think we could participate in this challenge? And these challenges, money-wise, is not that bad. Some of them are like, 50,000, but it's been growing. And some of these latest challenges are like $1 million. So that's pretty sweet, isn't it? So it depends on the challenge. They update this website almost every couple of weeks. So take a look at it, go through those challenges, and perhaps after you're done with small set, maybe you want to look into any of these challenges, all right? It's just another opportunity to engage students, to engage faculty, to do research on things that we need, right? So this one is just a newer one. It's called M-Plan. It's for $50,000, so it's very, smaller in terms of funding. It's focused more towards minority serving institutions. We're actually in the review cycle. So it closed. We just got a couple of proposals to review. If you go to the next slide, it will actually show that I had 2 different solicitations, one for faculty to help us create a storage standard for methane. As you know, SpaceX is going to be using a lot of methane. The government really doesn't use methane. I mean, you saw liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen tanks, right? When we took you around the pad, that's what we use. SpaceX is going to use a big methane tank. They're going to be using it for fueling. So we're going to be storing methane on KSC property, but we haven't done big storage of it. So we're looking around. Is there even a storage standard? There isn't. So we're asking for help. Same thing as when you mix methane and oxygen, you get some crazy stuff. So we're trying to understand what are those solutions, what's the quantity of those solutions that it gets a little bit on the dangerous side. So again, 2 different solicitations that we put out from our side of the house, Kennedy, to get faculty to help us understand that. So those are the 3. So Inspires, NASA Solve, and M-Plan. Now I'm going to go into a little bit more in depth into one solicitation that is currently live, that your faculty is probably working very hard on putting a proposal right now. And Justin mentioned it 2 weeks ago when he was at at the visitor center. I'm just going to drill down a little bit more. So this is a small spacecraft technology programs, which is part of the Space Technology Mission Directorate. It's called University Small Sat Technology Partnership. So this is funding that we want to give out to universities for them to build their satellite. Okay, not to launch it. That's our buddies in the CubeSat Launch Initiative. You met Liam a couple of weeks ago. You haven't met Norm. Norm is a very busy guy, but hopefully he'll be here in a couple of weeks. So we'll go more deep into this solicitation. It's basically 3 technology topic areas and then 2 target operational domains. And this is just an awareness, right? I'm not giving you things like help your faculty because they should be doing this right now if they're going to actually be proposing. But is an awareness of a real solicitation that is out there, that is live, and is due in 2 weeks, the final proposal. The goal is basically help develop new technologies or capabilities by U.S. colleges and universities. So it's focused for you guys. And it could be either a ground-based technology, or it could be a spacecraft or payload for suborbital, for a balloon, or even spaceflight technology demonstrations, right? It's limited to colleges, universities, undergraduate, graduate teams. And the key thing here that the university, if selected, has to have partnered with a NASA center. If you read that solicitation, there's team members assigned to each center. I'm the POC for Kennedy. And this was a 2-step process, which I'll mention. If a faculty gets selected or down selected for step 2, they're going to be calling me really quick if they want to partner with Kennedy. Okay. And that's just a requirement that they have to have. They have to partner, not just with Kennedy. They could choose any other of the 9 centers to, including JPL, to partner with. So the first technology topic area is Earth and Global Navigation Satellite System, right? Independent PNT for small spacecraft. There's thoughts out there that the Deep Space Network is going to be exceeded eventually. So what other type of technology can a small spacecraft could entertain testing such that it could help alleviate the stress that the capacity of the Deep Space Network is going to have? So we're looking for topics, you know, what you think we could be. The other one is more like AI architecture, software platforms, devices for small spacecraft. You guys use ChatGPT? Look at that smile. Yeah, no, I don't use it. A lot of AI for a lot of different things. So we're looking for proposals on that one. High power or in thermal control for small spacecraft. Here, just basically trying to see if we could help develop new ways of deploy power generation systems, power storage systems, right? Because it's usually a challenge for that. So hoping to use small spacecraft to utilize some of that technology and just make that more evolved. So 3 topic areas. And then there's 2 domains. So basically here is like, hey, you know, you could try to do that technology or that topic area in a cislunar or deep space exploration, right? And that's within the lines of the small spacecraft strategic plan. Or the other domain is basically improving the resiliency of future and commercial spacecraft in orbit. So 2 different types of areas you could look into. So 3 topics, 2 different areas, just to help improve the technology. In terms of funding, your faculty could get up to $225,000 per year for 2 years. So that's $450,000. That's pretty cool, right? It's not bad. They could actually request NASA support, or what we call a full-time equivalent of just half a person, right? So think about if they would want to have a subject matter expert in any field, they would say, okay, give me 0.5. It does not really count against their proposal. It's just something additional they could request. And up to $30,000 for if they need to use a vacuum chamber. So the time associated with utilizing a vacuum chamber or a vibration table, or even, any other type of infrastructure that may not be available at the institution. It's live. So it was a two-step approach. They would have proposed already like a 2-pager, and it's already been reviewed. So I believe at the end of this week or early next week, they will be told you've been selected for the second stage. So now you got until July 18th to submit a full proposal, right? So they're sweating it right now. Maybe somebody who's listening already got the nod to do a second proposal, a full proposal. And so that's going to be interesting. So you may hear this once it gets awarded. So we're hoping to award 8 different universities. And it's just a little table. So period of performance, 2 years, every year, 225,000, civil servant up to 0.5, and then 30,000 for 2 years. Questions on that? You would have to pick each one of either the topic 1, 2, or 3. And then within that topic, which domain are you going to be going? Cislunar, exploration? I'm just giving you the tools, which you may look, it's like, that's too much for me right now. I get it. But it's just knowledge is power. Now you know where to look for funding opportunities. If your faculty leaves, you have this knowledge now. You could continue the torch of trying to get funding for university. So that was the main thing I wanted to get across. The other stuff, we'll talk about some of the things that you saw in a couple of videos that may even help you put everything into perspective. So you saw where we process this, this SLS. We didn't get to see Orion per se, but you saw that big tower. We didn't talk too much about Gateway, but Gateway is a small space station that is going to be built, kind of like a partnership between different European unions and us. And it's going to be in a near rectilinear helio orbit. So it's just going to go around the moon, South Pole, very close to the South Pole, go out and then come back. That's what a near rectilinear helio orbit looks like. And it's good because if there's any issues, they could come back to Earth. And then if and when we're ready to go to Mars, they could just jump to Mars. You know that we're going to be landing in the moon and we're going to have a base camp. So Artemis number 2. When are we launching Artemis number 2? That was number 3, yes. But Artemis number 2 is 2024, right? 4 crew, they're not going to land on the moon. They're just going to go around it again and test all the human systems and then come back. Land in the water just like Artemis 1. And then 3 will be 2025, and it'll have the first female landing on the surface of the moon and the first person of color landing as well. So why the moon? I think somebody asked me, why are we just going to the moon first? Why not just go to Mars? Look at the difference in distance. When you put a visual into this slide, you say, shit, it's different, right? 240,000 miles, which takes us about 3 days to get there, versus 39 million miles takes about, depending on the time of year, 6 to 9 months to get there. So yeah, we're trying to figure out how to, in a very close location, before we make the big jump. And this just talks about, things that will help us prepare for Mars. We're going to check into trans-habitats, orbit to surface operations, understand all that logistical, commercial resupply and refueling, the health of our astronauts, which we haven't figured that out yet. The GCRs, galactic cosmic rays, creates havoc on your DNA. Those are the bad ones. Those are the ones that kind of go in and make up not a happy place. So on the surface, all of those different things, try to understand mobile operations, resiliency, exploration. Even though we have one design, there could be many different configurations depending on what it is that we're launching. So just a takeaway, they're calling it different blocks depending on what it is that we're going to be launching. You didn't get to see any of the boosters, but you saw the platform in which those boosters are integrated. You didn't get to see the first stage. but you were in the place that we integrated. We didn't go inside the space station facility because there were some operations going on. This is just a quick little video of what happened to Artemis 1. So we launched it from Kennedy. It went around the moon. It had this little dash lines. So we actually did that, went really far out, and then did another loop around the moon, and then came back and landed on the water. So that was Artemis 1. This is just mating the solid rocket boosters on the mobile launcher, the core stage with the upper stage. The one in the middle and the lower, that's a ESPA, right? Amy knows all about ESPAs. She was showing me one yesterday. And that's the ESPA that carried 10 CubeSats. So as it was going through its orbit, it launched them at different points in time, okay? Some of them have not become operational. Some have been more successful than others, but still 10 were launched. So this is a quick little video, kind of put in perspective what you saw while you were inside the transfer aisle, right? This is what I was trying to explain, that we start with the aft cone section, put it on the base of the mobile launch platform. We bolted with 4 bolts. You may have seen that bolt, one of those bolts in the 1000 room, was kind of laying down on the table. It had a nut that was just sheared off. 4 bolts attached to each of those solid rocket boosters. And in the middle, you see a couple of technicians pushing it. What do you think of that? Just testing, making sure that we got that, torque value set. Imagine doing that. So we first integrate all the solid rocket boosters that we get by rail from now Northrop Grumman, used to be ATK, but Northrop bought them, and put them all first. And this was just a picture of the engine testing. Oh, yeah, yeah. Just main engine, what we call a green test, making sure the engines were operational. These were shuttle main engines that were refurbished, upgraded to fly on the SLS. So over in Stennis Flight Center, that's where we do all of our engine testing. You can see them doing a little bit of gimbal. And all that big plume is basically steam, water hitting that thing. So here is the delivery of the core stage to Kennedy. So it comes in a barge through the ICW, Intercoastal Waterway. Pull it out, basically. And remember, there's 2 tanks inside this orange tank, a liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen that act then as the fuel for the 4 engines. We bring it inside the vehicle assembly building. And then if you go to the next slide. So this is just kind of ready for the core stage. So here is the core stage is being lifted in that transfer aisle and lifted over and through that hole and then brought down very slowly. Right? Oh, it's a whole day, usually sometimes 2. It could, it could be held in place by the cranes. You can see it just being lifted from the transfer aisle and then moved across that opening. So we have a whole clear, so everything around the area just comes to a standstill as we do the transfer. Because a lot of you were asking, well, what happens? Where does it go through? How does it go across? That's how. And then we very gently lowered it in between those 2 solid rocket boosters, and that's how it gets attached, right? So 4 bolts per solid rocket boosters. That core stage is attached to the SRBs. All right. And that's just another view, different views. All right. If you go to the next one. So just pictures. Yep. Different pictures of the different segments. These are the actual CubeSats as they were being processed. So you have a couple from JAXA, that's the Japanese Aerospace Agency, one from Moorhead State University, Marshall Space Flight Center. So there's others as well. And then for Artemis 2, there's a lot of activities going on. So this is just meant to, hey, we're doing a lot of things towards next year's launch. Just there's a lot of progress towards it. A lot of things are complete. Things are being delivered to the Cape. And then Artemis 3, there's a lot of activity towards that as well. Testing of the solid rocket motors, processing the engines, core stage production. So it's a lot of different things are going on. When I tell you the moon is hot, there's a lot of activities that are going on in preparation for going back to the moon. It's another little video, little short one. Motivational one.
Our story is one of people. All those who make this journey possible.
From advocates across communities to companies across industries to countries around the world.
We achieve this collective endeavor. Our efforts create impact for all.
Technologies that revolutionize industries.
And jobs that bring prosperity to people. The discoveries from space.
Benefit the way we live on Earth today. And those from the moon will create a better future for generations to come. But to do that,
We must go.
hi, I'm Chellinger. My name is Rajachari.
Kayla Barron. Kate Burbis. Hi, I'm Christina Cook.
NASA astronaut Joe Acaba.
Jessica Amir.
Woody Hoberg.
Anne McLean. Stephanie Wilson.
My name is Johnny Kim.
Nicole Mann.
Victor Glover.
Jessica Watkins.
Hi, I'm Matthew Dominic.
Jasmine Mogbelli.
Frank Rubio. Scott Tingle.
This is what we do. This is what we will do.
Let's go.
Go to the moon to learn how to live on other planets.
For the benefit of all.
Keep going. These are just pictures of the rollout at the pad. The time is now. Let's create history. So, you know, I'm from Kennedy, right? But we have 9 other different centers, JPL as well. They're a federally funded research and development center. So we're all around. So you've been to SwampWorks, right? That's where I've worked as well. Let's keep going, see if you recognize any of this. So you were in that, you know, lab area. It changes. These are old pictures. You know, every time you go in, it changes to something else. You see the bin in the back. The whole focus just, you know, ISRU, in situ resource utilization, trying to figure out how to live off the land. You saw the bin, right? What was the regolith called? BP1, Black Point 1. It's from close to here, Arizona, Black Point, Arizona. Okay. And the reason why is something that simulates the moon, because it's a byproduct of a road operation, right? They take basalt rock and they crush it to do roads. And because that's very jagged, is very similar to the moon regolith, right? That has not seen weather, no wind, no water. More ISRU stuff. We didn't talk it too much, but we're trying to do also 3D printing for berms or even landing pads, launching pads, and we're adding a polymer to it. such that it's able to stick. And we're also doing the 3D printing in vacuum. You saw those big chambers. So we do have a lot of focus areas, chemistry, electrostatics, applied physics, corrosion. This is what I kind of talked to with faculty. These are our primary center roles. It's a bit of a notch. Oh, no, I think I took it out. I took it out because it's a little bit of a eye shot. So these are our focus areas. So we work, with the International Space Station program. We still deliver things to it. We have Space Technology Mission Directorate projects, biological and physical science, human research, advanced exploration systems, so a lot of different technologies. So where I work is the research side of the house, which we got you to tour as much as possible, right? Good. Questions you may have. How are you enjoying this program so far? I wish I was your age and I was doing this with you. I mean, how cool is this? You can't beat this with a stick. NASA does not have this program. It is unique to them. Rather than reinventing something from scratch, it's not gonna fly. Let's just partner. So this has been a great collaboration with them, with the Air Force, and we're hoping to continue this in the future. It just makes a heck of a lot of sense. I have even had questions already been asked. Why have we not done this before? Well, we're doing it now. All right, questions? Study as much as you can, because this is a one in a lifetime opportunity. This will change. Once you do the whole program and then go to small sat in Logan, it's going to blow your mind.